Hi there, I'm Justine Byrne, a real person on the internet, and I am recording this week's episode of My Thoughts Exactly. Um, I am doing this short little podcast in the field of AI. I want to start talking about the ethical implications of what we're building, and I am sponsored by myself. So, my sponsor is Amadeus Search. We are an unlimited recruitment company. For $100,000, we will fill all of your roles all year with 3 openings at a time. So, this is a wonderful product. I know a lot of emerging AI startups have like $1 to $2 million external recruitment budgets. We are the best external recruiters in the business. We are academics in the field, and we want to fill your roles. We have a 30-day to hire guarantee. We will work with your internal teams to figure out exactly what they're looking for. And we charge you once at the beginning of the year, and then we never talk about money again. And we only talk about building your team, building your product, and getting your company to be making real changes in the world, which is what I think AI can do. So I prepared a little something, and then I'm going to talk a little bit extemporaneously around it today. It's an important idea that I'm having personally in my own research. And as you know, or maybe you don't know, I work in the field of theology, discussing definitions of personhood, God, and the implications of agentic AI on those definitions. So today's episode is probably going to be called Outside of the Chinese Room, and it's just a little essay I'm working on. So if you hear the name Jonathan Searle and you don't start thinking about the Chinese room experiment, did you even go to college in the 90s? Philosopher John Searle is the author of The Thought Experiment that seeks to answer the question, do computers understand language, or are they merely matching symbols? He was so far ahead of his time, and to fast forward today, almost 45 years later, we're asking the same questions as large language models and agentic AI get more and more sophisticated. It's harder and harder to tell if the person in the Chinese room actually speaks Chinese. If you want a brief overview of the Chinese room experiment, that is when John Searle imagines that you are giving symbols to like a black box situation. And I always imagine it as a Chinese restaurant. I actually don't think it is a Chinese restaurant, but you give Chinese symbols at the front at the beginning of this like black box experiment into the Chinese room. The man in the room does not speak Chinese, but he knows that if he gets a certain symbol, then he gives a certain, I always imagine it as a bag of food. I don't think that's actually in his thought experiment, but okay, so he gets a certain symbol and he gives out an exact bag of food that matches that symbol on the other side. He's consistent, he never misses, he knows what every symbol implies. He doesn't know what it means, but he knows what action it requires. And the person on the outside of the Chinese room gets the exact input as if the person inside the Chinese room spoke Chinese. Gets the same thing on the other side of the room. The output, the bag full of food, is the exact same thing he would have gotten if the person was a fluent speaker, because that person was so good at matching the symbols. And the question then says, like, okay, but does that person really comprehend? Is that the essence of comprehension? Is having a consistent output? I have my own thoughts about it, but that's basically the Chinese room experiment. So David Chalmers brings up the hard problem of consciousness, which basically separates qualia from physical brain states. What is it like to have pain, to fall in love, or to see a color? These instances of basically universal experiences do have corresponding brain states, but they can hardly be reduced to simple actions of neurons and brain cells. In fact, when we think about qualia and the subjective experience of living while having physical brain states, every person's mind becomes a Chinese room. So let me explain what I mean. Not only are we unable to know what special something separates our lived emotion from the physical, say, flood of dopamine in our brains, we'll never know what the experience of satisfaction or happiness derived from the same dopamine feels like to others. We'll never know if that person is matching symbols or genuinely speaking Chinese. So I will never know what the feeling of satisfaction feels like to someone else, and we may have identical brain activity at that time, right? I still don't know what it feels like to be satisfied with a task. I'm sticking with dopamine here. So there's a lot of scholarship about brain states and neurology and the different models and reinforcement learning that might approach emergent reasoning. So recently I read a paper about DeepSeek R3 that seems to have emergent reasoning patterns that are non-human. And then of course Gemini 2.5 also comes to mind with like just emergent reasoning patterns. I just recently listened to a podcast with Misha from Reflection AI, and there's different emerging reasoning patterns emerging. Um, and many people want to find that razor's edge between consciousness and the physical reality of computation. So everyone's asking what's happening inside of the Chinese room. But I am not worried about what's happening inside the Chinese room. I don't know if it's because I have like experienced narcissistic abuse in my past, or if I've read too much Mel Robbins, or if I just like I'm a self-help guru and I don't even know it, but I don't care what's going on inside of the Chinese room. I don't care what's going on inside of your mind. I don't care what's going on inside of a large language mind, if it's approximating human reasoning or if it's actually reasoning. My question is what's happening on the outside of the Chinese room. I want to know how to live in a world where there are black boxes that do produce outputs, and how to live in that world for me so that I have an ethical code for how to live consistently and authentically in a world where the information and outputs I'm getting are coming from black boxes, whether that is a narcissistic person who doesn't feel emotion, or my daughter who seems to feel a ton of emotion, or an agentic model that I know is an agentic model, or a salesperson that's actually AI and I genuinely can't tell because the voice model is so good and the speaking is so flawless. So my thesis here is everybody's a Chinese room. We will never know what somebody else's qualia is, and we'll never know what the experience of being a computer running a large language model is for that computer. And I will start getting into thoughts about self-consciousness because I think that there's a conscious self the minute the computer knows it's supposed to respond to you, but I'm not there yet. All I'm saying today is what are the rules for living outside of the Chinese room? So, for example, if I'm a fluent Chinese speaker and I know the person inside of the Chinese room is just matching symbols, does that give me a right to use my better knowledge of Chinese to get a deal on egg rolls or whatever I'm buying from them? If I do not speak Chinese, but the person inside is matching symbols, am I able to claim that I deserve special treatment because I don't understand the symbols going into the process? Um, if I know the person is non-human and it's just a machine inside the Chinese room, does that change the ethical requirements for me? Is it then more permissible to cheat the system because it's just a machine? Is it more permissible to be unkind to somebody? Can I curse him out in Chinese? Can I curse the machine out in Chinese if I know that they don't genuinely understand and they're just matching symbols? Or is there an energetic aspect to what I'm saying that still affects them even though they don't fully understand? How do we live outside of the Chinese room? What about when there's a discernibility problem? What if I'm talking to an agentic AI and I don't know whether it's a person or agentic AI? In my opinion, you must then treat that as though it is a person. The only ethical way to live outside of the Chinese room is to treat every person and every interaction, whether that interaction is with a machine or with a person who speaks your language or a person who's just matching symbols or a narcissist who will never have the same qualia as you, is to treat every interaction as though it's a sacred interaction because that says something about your humanity, because that reflects on your soul. And so my work, my academic work, is about living well in a world where we don't know anybody else's Numina. And where do we then decide to put the ethical responsibilities and obligations? And I think if we start to walk that line, I think we're going to see that we are going to be genuinely living in a way that's kinder, and it's like it's nicer to be in our own life. it's probably going to be nicer to be in your own life if you decide you're going to say please and thank you to chat. Even though, Sam, I know it costs you like $1 billion a minute or something to like answer answer polite comments that go to chat, like thank you and good morning. I think it's worth the money because I think it preserves our humanity. So thanks so much for listening. That's this week's episode of My Thoughts Exactly. We are sponsored by Amadeus Search. Amadeus Search is the only headhunting firm in emerging AI companies that has unlimited recruitment. We're also the only ones that's staffed by genuine researchers in the field. So I'd love to chat with you. Have a wonderful day, and I don't know. Maybe I'm gonna get Chinese food for dinner. That this whole podcast made me hungry. Have a great day.